There is one distinction at the center of everything we do here. Not which playlist to use, not how many categories to build, not how many subscriptions you have. One distinction: active consumption versus passive consumption. And once you understand it, really understand it, at the level of what you're actually doing, moment to moment, on the platform, everything else starts to make sense. That is what this video is about. My name's Michael T, and this is As an Aggregator. We build methodology for what it actually means to use YouTube, not just consume it. Use it. There is a difference. And today I'm going to show you what that difference is, where it comes from, and why it matters for your relationship to every platform you touch. Let's get into it. Question 1. The actual difference. The most load-bearing distinction in playlist theory is not about which playlists you use. It's not about how many categories you have. It's the distinction between active and passive consumption. Everything else in this methodology is downstream of that one decision. So let me ask it directly. What is the actual difference between passive and active content consumption at the level of what you are doing, moment to moment, on the platform? Here is the honest answer. Passive consumption is flow. You are just consuming. You are just moving through content without consciously forming the intent behind why you are consuming it. Think about what you actually use content for in a given moment. Are you using it as escapism? Are you using it to better yourself? Are you using it for entertainment? Are you using it to buy time? Are you using it to cover up a feeling you don't want to access right now? Most people cannot consciously formulate the intent behind their consumption. They are using it to fill time because it is what you do, because it's the cheapest form of entertainment available to you. And for a lot of people, that is okay. We're not here to judge that. We are here to say there's another way. There's another way to access the power of YouTube. There's another way to engage with your preferred platform. And it starts with understanding what YouTube actually is. YouTube is not a television channel. YouTube is not a content library. YouTube is a cybernetic ecology with knobs, dials, and systems as a system that you as the content consumer can actually use. You can tweak how you interact with the platform. You can train yourself and transform yourself from a passive content consumer who has no idea why they are watching a documentary versus slop versus a lecture versus culture commentary versus a video that tells a compelling story. It's made by AI. Who does not know that they are listening to a religious sermon versus background music versus rain noise versus railway footage into someone that knows exactly what they're consuming and why? So it's about that transformation process from transforming someone into someone that says, I'm just consuming content, to understanding that why. Active consumption starts with the title. It starts with a naming convention. It starts with a schema that says this is a piece of content that belongs somewhere in my consume digest for a specific reason. And it's okay to say that it does not belong anywhere. It's okay to say nothing I watched this week was worth putting into a playlist. It's okay. At least you know that. That's fine. But when you come across a piece of content that does belong, one that's worth retrieving later, you now have a system to hold it. That is the actual difference between active and passive consumption. Most people do not know how to influence their recommendation feed, positively or negatively. They do not know how to use not interested or don't recommend this channel. They do not know how to use positive reinforcement with the search term. They do not know how to use their watch history to condition their recommendation feed. They do not know any of this because they have been stuck in a passive consumption loop. And why? Because it begins with a title. It begins with language. And the moment you have that language, the moment you have a framework for what you are watching and why, you can begin to steer. That is where everything changes. Question 2, the algorithm problem. Passive consumption has a specific signature. The algorithm decides, the short speed auto advances, the home screen refreshes, and you take what it gives you. You are a passenger. Your consume digest accumulates, not from your choices, but from the platform's suggestions operating on your prior behavior. So what does it mean that most people's media diet is built almost entirely from suggestions rather than decisions? Philosophically, I will be honest with you, I've not fully gone down that road. I do not know exactly what it implies about the psychology of men and women that so many people are being passively steered by a recommendation engine. That is an open question. It is worth sitting with. But there is something important to flag here. There's a reason Cambridge Analytica worked. There's a reason advertising is $1 billion industry. There's a reason that getting eyeballs on content and steering people toward what they consume is the foundational structure of the entire media economy. People are being steered in ways they cannot perceive because they do not know that a different way is possible. They think the algorithm is giving them what they want to watch. They think it is serving their interests. They have no reason to suspect that it's optimizing for retention, rather than for the expansion of their awareness, rather than surfacing the unknown unknowns. And that is where the problem starts. The question of what this means for the modern psyche, I do not have a complete answer. What I do know is the point at which being superserved by the recommendation engine stops being a convenience and starts being a problem. That point is when you lose touch with the unknown unknowns. When you get so deep inside what's being recommended to you that you forget you're in a filter bubble, that the algorithm is conditioning the walls around your perception. It may feel like infinite content. It may feel like everything you could possibly want to watch, but it is really offering you the surface area that broadcast television offered, when specific channels surface specific programs at specific times, and you had the choice to find them. This is different because it's on demand, because it is specific, because it lets you tell yourself, I am just consuming what I want. When in reality, the suggestions are funneling you in a direction you cannot perceive because you are not going on search journeys. You are not conditioning your algorithm because you are not yet asking the routing question. The 3 biggest problems with being superserved by the algorithm. 1, you lose access to the unknown unknowns. That's the most important one. 2, you get sandboxed inside your filter bubble. You don't know what's out there because you've been conditioned to stay inside. What feels right? What feels like what you watch? YouTube knows your retention rates. It maximizes those rates. It gives you a sandbox of specific types of content that it knows you will watch, that you scroll to the bottom of your home screen and there's more of it. And 3, you lose access to the YouTube rabbit holes, the pathways that would have taken you somewhere unexpected, somewhere outside the algorithm, or somewhere outside what the algorithm already knows about you. Those 3 things, that is what it means to be superserved until it stops being a convenience. Real quick, if any of this is landing for you, if you are already thinking about your own consumption differently, I want you to go and check out our playlist archive channel. It's called Mr. Pollock 890, Mr. POLIK 890. If you are new to us, start with the Watch Here. Start with the Start Here playlist. Everything you need to understand what we are building is organized and ready for you there. You can browse any of the publicly available playlists and check out our post section. There are unlisted playlists in there too. Go there, consume, come back, we'll be here. Question 3. The hinge. There is a specific moment when passive consumption ends and active consumption begins. It is not when you subscribe to a new creator. It is not when you find a new video you love. It is when you ask a routing question. 3 questions specifically. Is this ASAP? What category does this belong to? Which playlist would best represent this body of work? That question is the hinge. So what changes in your relationship to content the moment you start asking routing questions instead of just saving, liking, or deferring? And why is routing the verb that separates a passive consumer from an active one? Let me go somewhere unexpected for a second. I want you to take a look at the word routing itself, because the reason I use this specific word is not arbitrary. To rout as a verb means to defeat or conquer comprehensively, to cause something to retreat in disorder, to put an end to delve into or hollow out a surface, to subject something to a thorough search in order to locate something. And as a noun, the process of finding a route or path, an interface between two systems. Direct delivery, that last one, an interface between two systems, that is exactly what the routing question does. It places a conscious inference interface between you and the content. Because that inference between you and the content, because what changes in your relationship to content the moment you start routing? You start developing conscious competence. That 4-stage cycle: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, unconscious competence, and back again. The routing verb activates that cycle because it says, I have an intention. I have a playlist title in mind. I have a place where the video belongs, or, and this is equally important, I recognize that it does not belong anywhere. And that recognition itself is conscious competence. You can scroll past the video without touching those 3 dots. You do not have to interact. But that scroll, that choice not to interact, is a decision, not a default. And this ASAP, what category does it belong to? Which playlists would best represent this body of work? That question is the hinge. And here is something most people do not realize. When you click those 3 dots and add a video to a playlist, or when you create a new playlist from scratch, you are building new neural pathways every single time. Every time you have to make that decision. Do I put this in an ASAP quick pick? Do I put this in a category specific quick pick? Does this even deserve a playlist? Does this deserve my time? You are doing something that passive consumption never asks of you. You are exercising discernment. You are developing a structured relationship to the content that moves through your hypergraph. Routing is the verb that separates passive consumption from active consumption because it is thinking. It is conscious thought applied to content in the moment of encounter, not after, not in retrospect, in the moment. And over time, that moment-to-moment exercise changes how your algorithm feeds you. It changes what your subscription box surfaces. It changes the walls of your filter bubble from something closing in on you to something you are actively widening. Most people do not know you can do that. Most people do not know it is possible to steer their YouTube algorithm. They think it is whatever the platform gives them based on what they've watched last. We are here to tell you otherwise. And the verb that starts that transformation is routing. That question is the hinge. One more pause. If you are watching this and you are thinking, okay, I want to see what an active consume digest actually looks like in practice, go to Mr. Pollock 890, Mr. Polik 890. That channel is a playlist archive. It is the living documentation of what active consumption produces over time. You can see how playlists are organized, you can see the categories, and you can pull from any playlist that is publicly available. Check out the posts section. Unlisted playlists are in there too. That is the work. Go see what it looks like. Question 4. The vocabulary problem. Here is a question that goes deeper than the technique. Most content consumers do not think consciously about which playlist a video belongs to. They do not think about which body of work it sits closest to. They do not think about which bucket is most similar to what they are currently consuming. They just watch. And the reason they do not think about it consciously is not laziness. It is that they have never been given the vocabulary to do it. So, what is the relationship between having the vocabulary for something and being able to actually do it? And why is naming the categories, naming the routing decisions, naming the distinction between active and passive, why is the naming process itself an activation mechanism? This is where I want to go, to the origin of this entire methodology, because this question is why As an Aggregator exists. It is why we built playlist theory to begin with. We were asking a specific question. Does the existence of a playlist in the context of what graph theory calls a hypergraph, does that imply the existence of content curators? Let me explain what that means. We took Stephen Wolfram's framework, his work on hypergraph theory, and we applied it to the creator economy. In standard graph theory, you have edges and vertices, simple connections between points. But in hypergraph theory, an edge can connect to two nodes at once. You are not just dealing with individual connections. You are dealing with hyper edges, bundles of vertices, connections that span across multiple nodes simultaneously. And when we apply that framework to YouTube, something became clear. A playlist is not just a list of videos. A playlist is a hyper edge. It connects multiple content nodes, creators, topics, categories, moments in time, in a way that no single recommendation from the algorithm can replicate. And if a playlist is a hyperedge, then the person building that playlist, the person asking the routing question, is not just a consumer. They are not just a creator. They are something new, a content curator. The third pillar, not a consumer who happens to save videos, not a creator who happens to organize content, a curator, someone whose role is defined by the capacity to build hyper edges, to connect content across domains in ways that expand the surface area of someone's awareness. And here is what matters about vocabulary. We had to name that. Before we named it, it did not exist as a recognizable rule. Content consumption was enough. Content creation was enough. Nobody had named curation as the third thing. Nobody had identified the routing decision as the act that separates someone passively watching from someone actively building something. Because you cannot do something that does not have a name yet. Or rather, you can do it, but you cannot do it consciously. You cannot teach it. You cannot transmit it. You cannot build a methodology around it. Language is the activation mechanism, because without language, the thing you are doing is invisible, even to yourself. Think about what happens the moment you have the vocabulary. Suddenly, you have a conscious scaffold. You have a title. You have a category. You have a routing question. And that question is this ASAP. What category does this belong to? Which playlist would best represent this body of work? That question is not just an organizational decision, it is a linguistic inscription. It is the moment you affix a specific property to a specific piece of content and say, this matters to me in this way, or this does not matter to me at all, and I know that. That knowing is what I was missing. So much of what shapes modern culture, our media environment, our consumption patterns, our relationship to information, is a downstream result of what language has made available to us. Concepts that were previously undescribable become describable, and once describable, they become teachable, and once teachable, they become a methodology. That is what playlist theory is. It is the methodology that emerged from giving a name to something that was always happening, but was never seen. A content consumer becoming a curator, not by starting a channel, not by building an audience, but by asking the routing question. And we built as an aggregator to introduce that role, to disseminate that methodology, and to legitimize what we believe is the missing third pillar of the creator economy. Not just consumers, not just creators, consumers, creators, and curators. And the path from the first to the third starts with a title. It begins with a title. Last interjection before we close this out. If you want to see the third pillar in practice, if you want to see what a curated playlist archive looks like when someone is actively routing over years of deliberate consumption, go to Mr. Pollock 890, Mr. Polik 890. That channel is not a content channel, it is a curation channel. It is my playlist archive channel. It is the documentation of a consumed digest built through active consumption habits over a significant stretch of time since around 2019. Browse the playlist, check out the posts for unlisted content. If you're new, start with the Start Here playlist is where you begin. Everything is organized, everything is intentional. Go see what intentionality looks like at scale from the perspective of a curator. Question 5. What the transition feels like. We have talked about what the distinction is. We have talked about the routing question. We have talked about where the vocabulary comes from and why naming matters. Let me tell you what it actually feels like to make the transition. Playlist theory exists to move a content consumer from passive consumption to active consumption. And the instrument of that transformation is the playlist itself, used deliberately as a routing system, not as a convenience bin. So what does that transition feel like from the inside? I'll be honest with you, it feels taxing. It feels cognitively intense. It feels like you're going out of your way to do something that you haven't quite rationalized yet. And that is the truth. Because moving from passive to active consumption at the stage of conscious incompetence, moving towards conscious competence, that is one of the hardest transitions to make. You are aware of what makes your current approach insufficient. You know the technique exists. You know the routing question is available to you, but it feels antithetical to everything you have been doing, especially if you have spent years as a passive consumer. You are sitting there thinking, now I have to actually figure out whether every single video is worth indexing? And that is a real cost. It takes brain calories, quite literally. It takes cognitive energy. to apply that routing question to every piece of content that moves through your hypergraph. Something you want now, something you want later, something you do not want to touch, and the why. The conscious and unconscious why behind each of those decisions. That is the second half of the routing process. That is how your consume digest gets built in a way that is actually yours, not the algorithms, yours. Now, I want to be honest about who this technique was originally built for. Playlist theory emerged from the problem of super users, people consuming over 90 minutes of YouTube per day, long form, shorts, all of it. People whose subscription boxes were overrun by the volume of content they were trying to hold. This technique came out of that problem. And when we looked at it and said, we can take this and apply it to consumers at large, because even if you are not a power user, the routing question still transforms you. It still creates conscious competence. It still changes how you relate to YouTube as a cybernetic ecology. Because once you start routing, once you start deliberately placing content rather than just watching what arrives, you gain something you did not have before. You gain the capacity to steer. You can now augment your recommendation feed. You can influence your subscription box. You can change the walls of your filter bubble from the inside. You can use playlists, search, watch history, linguistic point plane vectors, all of the knobs, dials, and switches that are available to you to actively condition the algorithm rather than being conditioned by it. And your consume digest, the artifact of everything you have chosen to index, transforms from something ephemeral into something concrete, something you can package, something you can revisit, something you can eventually share. That is the shift. That is what changes about your relationship to YouTube as a cybernetic ecology. When you move from passive to active, you stop being a passenger, you become the operator. Everything that we have covered today, the distinction between active and passive consumption, the routing question as the hin, the vocabulary that makes conscious competence possible, and the third pillar that naming unlocks. All of it points to the same place. It begins with a title. And if you want to see what it looks like when that principle is applied to years of deliberate active consumption, go to Mr. Pollock 890. That's MRPOLIK 890. That is our playlist archive channel. That is the living documentation of an active consume digest. There are playlists organized by category, by time period, by topic, by consumption priority. If you are new to us, start with the Start Here playlist. That is where we have organized the entry points for everything we're building. If you are already inside the method, browse what is publicly available. Check the post section. There are unlisted playlists in there too. The content is there. The curation is there. The routing decisions are visible. Go consume from it. And when you find yourself asking, is this ASAP? What category does this belong to? Which playlists would best represent this body of work? That question is the hint. That is where active consumption begins. And that is what As an Aggregator is here to teach. We will see you in the next one.